Thank you, Karina. Now she's really got me nervous. But yeah, really thank you, all of you, for coming and welcome. Hope I don't waste your time too much. And thanks to Wanderlust. Hey, I mean, how about it, huh? What an event. You know, back in the 60s, I know it's a long time ago, but I used to go to events that were kind of like this. They were called love-ins, and they weren't, they were kind of like this, but different. This is really a very truly inspirational event, and it's really great to be here. I want to thank Leslie, who's here with her husband, Brian, and their family and friends. Leslie's from Firefox, and she's a surfer as well as a yogini, and she was the one who asked me to come and speak, so thank you for bringing me here. And I'd also like to thank my young and lovely wife of 30 years back there. I know she's going to kill me for singling her out like this, but she'll do that after we talk. So she, my wife Tony, is really the one who made me aware of Wanderlust. She came last year here, and when I was asked to participate in the first one in Hawaii, you know, at first I was going, I don't know. And she went, "You're going." So thank you, my dear. It took me a few years to figure out that her judgment and vision was a great deal better than mine. And, anyway. So I like to talk about yoga, and I like to talk about surfing because that's kind of all that I ever do. You know, the road of life is long, and it's a hard road, but it's our road. It's a road we must all go down, and we must do this on our own. Nobody else can do it for us. On this road, potholes of doubt, tailgating guilt, the inevitable blind curve of fears besiege us. With endless intersections, cross streets, and turns, we often lose our way. Our vehicle is prone to a multiplicity of painful and debilitating breakdowns. You know, while none of this lends itself to the development of a peaceful and happy state of mind, we need one to stay on course. So where do we find the balance to follow directions and keep our wheels on the road? Yoga teaches us about living a life in harmony with nature. You know, the most natural thing we do, just the simple act of breathing, really becomes a foundation for our yoga practice. Every time we come to our mats, we begin to breathe the right way. For many of us, you know, whenever we come to class, we must relearn the correct way to breathe. And we keep practicing this over and over until it becomes second nature again. We were born breathing in the proper manner, but along this road of life, we forgot how. Rapid, shallow, irregular mouth breathing takes the place of slow, rhythmic, deep breathing through our nose. When we breathe correctly and concentrate on our breathing, we become aware of an increasing state of mindfulness. And from this mindfulness, we begin to understand the value of living in the present. So mindful awareness and staying present are really all about paying attention. The world we live in today has many distractions, as I'm sure you know. Losing focus is easy. Concentration and staying focused is hard. A large part of attention is being able to be in the moment, right here, right now. Our minds drift back to the past so easily, and nostalgia makes us sad. Or we worry about the future, and we're not able to stay in the present. The moment is really all there is. The past and the future only exist in this moment. If we live in recollection and anticipation, we have a much less clear picture of the present. So staying present is an excellent intention to set for ourselves before each yoga session or before each day. Yoga mindfulness really builds a solid foundation for our life. His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, was once asked what surprised him most about humanity, and he answered, man. Because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, and then he sacrifices his money to recuperate his health. And he's so anxious about the future that he's not able to enjoy the present. The result being, he does not live in the present or the future. And he lives as if he's never going to die, and then dies, having never really lived. So the message there is that life is for living. Life is a series of moments, all strung together, moment to moment. While it may not be possible to live every single moment to its fullest potential, if we keep that intention in mind, we'll get more out of life than if we're too consumed, too anxious, too distracted, too oblivious, or simply not paying attention. So I'd like to talk today about something I call surf realization, and the relationship between surfing and yoga and how it's played a big part in my life. I began surfing when I was 10 years old, and I started my yoga practice 10 years after that, and in all those years since then, I've really thought a lot about both subjects. Like yin and yang, yoga and surfing really totally complement each other in ways that I'm still discovering. And there's also a little bit of one always in the other. So the level, or maybe I should say the depth of focus necessary to surf successfully is similar to the concentration required in sitting zazen or in any advanced meditation practice. And I know that's a bold, maybe outrageous statement, when you compare a Zen monk or a yoga master to some long-haired surfer, with the headphones clamped on, rocking out to heaven knows what music. It is, however, quite true that high-level surfing is only possible with a Zen empty mind, with an acute, very acute state of an awareness, a deep connection to the immediate environment, and the ability to be totally, absolutely in the present. That's the only way it can happen. Ridiculous, you might say, the years of training and dedication that it takes to become an adept you can't compare that to, some young surfer who may not yet even be a teenager. So while the similarities between a yogic adept and a surfer may not at first be self-evident, as we get deeper into this subject matter, I think you'll begin to grasp where I'm going with this. Yeah, there's a difference, a tremendous difference, On one hand, you got the Zen monk. On the other hand, smart-ass punk surfer. But the similarity is real, and it begins with what the surfing experience has to offer right from that very first wave. As every surfer in the audience knows, the attraction of surfing is the glide. This is a sensation that one feels from that, the first time, from that very first wave. And it's really as close to flying as humans can ever get. This feeling is fiercely intense, but so fleeting that it compels most people to completely rearranging their entire lives in further pursuit of recapturing this moment. This addiction to the glide never diminishes, but kind of like drugs, it never lasts long enough either. So for most surfers, life becomes about, all about that next wave. So what is it about this feeling that makes it so compelling? Is it just a hedonistic addiction? One might think so, given the seemingly endless sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle that surfers claim to enjoy. After more than 50 years of contemplation on this, this has really been my sound of one hand clapping question. I'm certain that this simple sensation, this gliding, this feeling of unbridled, emancipated freedom, for that's surely what it is, somehow unlocks or opens a door right into our heart and right into our soul. All of us have felt sometime, or maybe many times, perhaps during a particularly brilliant sunset, or maybe at the sight of some stunning vista, or maybe a moment of complete love with a newborn child. Felt an awareness of something divine or holy or just shiningly special. Maybe if you've had a strong religious upbringing or beliefs, you might not label it quite this way, but I'm talking about those moments that take the breath away, that leave our emotions just in a twitter. We're not really sure exactly what it is we're feeling. This is when our souls are bared. This is when we are truly, if maybe only momentarily, open and in touch with our inner self. For surfers, this moment is never so poignant as that very first time, that first glide. Inevitably, the magic of this special moment diminishes with the passage of time. And in spite of our best efforts to replicate it, it becomes buried very deeply under the burdensome efforts of avoiding at all costs the requisites of a normal life, with real responsibilities, real relationships, real employment, real schedules, so on and so on. Until a surfer is faced with asking himself, why am I doing this? If he's unable to recall that first time, that first feeling, he may just quit and try another path. However, if he's one of the fortunate ones, and he can still recapture that initial memory, he then advances his practice to a higher level. At this level, recognition and appreciation of these special moments become a much greater part of the experience. Our practice of yoga is generally not quite so simple in the beginning. Oftentimes it's our ego that takes that first step. We want our bodies to look beautiful, like our young yoga instructor. We want our bodies to feel better because a friend told us, yoga will cure a sore back or, tight hips and a hamstring or a stressed out life. But ultimately, yoga comes into our life when it's the right time to become part of our life. That's the way of it, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be. And like surfing, it can be a lot of hard work with little reward, and oftentimes what seems like no improvement. Surfing is 90% paddling, which is just, gut-busting work, hour upon hour, and all for this brief ride that's like only seconds long. Similarly, yoga too is class after class, where it seems like there's little or no progress, and then there's that comparison to that person who hardly ever comes, and, they make it look so easy and like they're having fun, and while we struggle. But this is life. There isn't anything easy about it. And if we believe in the concept of reincarnation, we do it over and over again, wondering why and for what purpose must we submit to this pain and suffering and fear of old age and death until we cross the path of yoga. For many of us, we must crisscross this path many times because at first it only appears as like this very faint trail until finally we recognize it as a superhighway that it really is. Denial and avoidance is human. Are we not often dragged kicking and screaming by well-meaning parents, loved ones, or friends into what soon becomes some of our greatest joys in life? Ride that first wave, the real one, or any of the metaphorical ones, with your heart open. Just like we strive to experience each yoga practice and fly like a bird on the wings of the wind. The lessons that come from surfing are extraordinary and ongoing. Right off the bat, one must learn to deal with being aware, being present, and being spontaneous. Paying attention is really key in a liquid world fraught with distractions. Actually, paying attention is key in any world, just more so in a liquid one where, any loss of focus or concentration, even for an instant, usually results in a wipeout. In the old days, before they had surf leashes, that usually meant a long swim in after you're bored and time to reflect on how you messed up. But riding a wave is an absolutely spontaneous endeavor, and this is because each wave is very much like a snowflake, uniquely individual and always just a little bit different from any other. Of course, it's good to have a plan of action and clearly defined goal. They're always good to have in mind. It's been said we should know where we're going so we'll know if we get there. But in most cases, when we look back, once we're there, wherever there is, we realize that it was a journey that really held much more than the actual there. The getting there is bigger than the there. Being human, however, we always make plans and set goals. But all those well-laid plans and goals go right out the window when the wave comes. And hopefully we're attentive enough to see it coming. We'll talk in depth about the alternative of not seeing it a little later. So we see this wave, we make a conscious decision that we're going to catch it, and we kick in this, supremely physical, explosive effort towards accomplishing that goal. And depending on our experience, our equipment, our physical conditioning, the timing, good fortune, the other surfers in the water, and a myriad of other factors, we may actually catch the wave if we manage to pop to our feet, the right place on the board, the right place on the wave. And I can tell you for sure that all of this is always a big surprise. Then and only then do we have a chance to ride this wave. The effort, years, luck, and everything else that went into, that lead up to this moment are actually quite staggering. It is, however, all the work and frustration of getting to this point where the real value is found. I may not have gone where I intended to go, but I ended up where I needed to be. Learning to surf is a never-ending process. It's endlessly frustrating as well. No matter how long you do it, or even how skilled you become at it. Here you might say, well, why do it then? You can ask me later if you're still wondering. But there is a greater, more valuable lesson about expectation. Expectations are a part of every breath we take. We just take it for granted that our lungs are going to continue to pump, our hearts continue to beat. We just expect them to work. We have expectations about everything we do, and when those expectations are not fulfilled, we usually suffer a little disappointment. So expectations have a bit of arrogance about them. It can hold us back from learning. It's always better to be open-minded and humble. There's an aphorism that's served me well in surfing and in life. Always easier to ride the horse in the direction it's going. There's another one that says, follow the instructions and take what you get. Today, surfing is a big sport, as well as a huge industry. But as an act, it remains the same as it's always been. A whole lot of fun, completely compelling, difficult, different, irreverent, frustrating, a whole lot of waiting around, extremely time-consuming. Physically, mentally, and spiritually satisfying, and educational in a way that's hard to describe. It seemed the first 20 years I surfed was just a test to see if I was really interested. All of a sudden, the intrinsic wisdom that's so much a part of the surfing experience began to reveal itself. Let me attempt to paint a picture. In order to catch a wave, one needs to be in the right position, and that position is a function of a great many things, because in a wide open ocean, there aren't exactly signposts. And the waves always come on their own schedule as well, never yours. So the surfer waits, trying to be exactly where he thinks that next wave will be. Does everyone know where waves come from? Actually, I surfed for 12 years pretty seriously, thinking I knew all I needed to know about waves before I ever found out. And it was only because of the gracious generosity of probably the most amazing surfer I've ever met, the esteemed George Downing, who patiently explained it to me. But what makes waves is another world in itself. But let's take a look at it. Tidal waves or tsunamis are a result of deep sea seismic activity and shifting tectonic plates. But the waves that we surf all come from the wind, and they can travel thousands of miles before they get to where our surfer's waiting. So depending on the time of year, maybe a little weather slips off the Siberian coast, or maybe brews up, as it's that roaring 40s latitude in the southern hemisphere. Generally, we're talking about an area of low barometric pressure, although surf can actually, and often does, come from high pressure cells as well. But for now, since we're in California and it's summer, let's talk about a little weather, a little depression that maybe slides under Australia, and as it gets near the South Island of New Zealand, all of a sudden something affects it, and it kicks in and starts to get a little stronger. And as this cold air in this depression encounters the warmer waters, it begins to spin and gains energy as it spins and starts to spin faster. And in the southern hemisphere, I don't know if any of you flush the toilet down in Australia, but it always spins in a clockwise motion. Up here in the northern hemisphere, it's counterclockwise. But as it spins, it generates this wind, and the energy increases, and it starts to spin faster. And as the wind blows across the water, it, like in a bathtub when you blow on the water, it generates these little ripples. And in this way, there's a transfer of energy from the air into the water. So these ripples start moving in the direction, maybe towards where we're waiting for it. And as the front ripples start to run out of energy, the one behind it catches up, and they combine their energy. And this continues. The ones in front start to slow down. The ones behind reinforce, consolidating the energy. The most interesting thing about waves is that the water isn't moving. The water is just a conduit for the energy that moves through the water. And I've always thought how this can relate to people. My wife likes to say, sometimes I wake up grumpy, but most times I let him sleep. But we wake up in the morning. Sometimes we are grumpy, and sometimes we're happy. Why really doesn't matter. That's just the way it is. But like that low pressure area that attracts any other low in the area, gets deflected away from the high pressure zones, or sometimes sucks some wind energy out of them, that our low spirits, they can get lower. And those in high spirits avoid us because we bring them down. And a harsh word, because we don't feel like saying any kind ones, can have repercussions way down the line. Those of you who are married know that. Just like that wave that started down near New Zealand and ends up in Ocean Beach or, maybe in Santa Cruz. So back to that building swell. As the reinforcement continues, the swells spread apart and travel in what's called waves, sets of waves. The interval or wave period, the space between the waves, is really a more important indicator of the strength of the swell than the actual wave height. The stronger the swell, the further apart the waves travel, and the deeper into the water the energy goes. Finally, as they approach that waiting surfer who, maybe was thinking about the argument he had with his wife in the morning when he said he was going surfing and she thought he was going to do the yard work, or, did he lock his car when he, in his frenzy to get out in the waves? Anyway, he was just distracted, and he misses that momentary glimpse when that swell humps up on an outer reef or a sandbar or a shallow spot offshore, just for a moment before it sinks back down as it comes in towards shore. So when the surfer finally sees that set approaching, he realizes it's bigger than any waves that have come in all day. And he also realizes, with a terrible sinking feeling, that he's too far inside for where those waves will break. And there's not enough time to do anything about it. This is a circumstance called getting caught inside. And while it's a common occurrence in surfing, it's always unwelcome. Being out of position means not only is that surfer not going to be able to ride any waves in this set, but in fact, those waves are going to ride him. In big surf, this is a terrifying experience right from that moment of realization, all through those moments, as you're waiting for the inevitable. And then that tremendous and sometimes dangerous pummeling, the extent of which is a function of how strong the swell is and how many waves are in the set. And if anyone has been in a situation where they've been unable to breathe for whatever reason, they have an idea of what it's like to be trapped underwater by pounding surf and not be able to come to the surface. So the surfer has several options when this happens. He can do nothing, which doesn't do any good. He can panic, which is worse. Or he understands what's about to happen. He relaxes as much as he can to conserve his energy and his air. And he tries to just hold his position. One of the reasons surfing is so appealing is because, generally speaking, it's pretty safe. By doing nothing, you usually just get washed back to shore where you have to start all over again. By panicking, you may swallow some water or, have some moments of terror. But by keeping his composure, holding his position, and continuing to paddle, he'll probably lose some ground, but he'll be in a good position when the set ends. See, just like in life, waves come in sets. And then after the set, there's a period of calm called a lull. So during this lull, the surfer who kept his cool is able to regain his position in the lineup, and with some first-hand experience of where the biggest waves break. So he'll be much better prepared for the next set. Adversity of any kind is often difficult to deal with, But getting caught inside, especially in big waves, can give us a playbook and understanding that no matter what happens, in the end, we learn something that we didn't know before. Good judgment comes from experience. A whole lot of that comes from bad judgment. Over the last 20 years, I've done a lot of snowboarding, and I've discovered that snowboarding and skiing can, in my opinion, be a whole lot more dangerous than most forms of surfing. But besides the risk factor, I have a tremendous respect for the mountains as well as for the oceans. There is a majesty and a live quality about both that instills a sense of spiritualness. There have been many mornings spent looking at a freshly snow-covered mountainside or nice waves peeling through an empty lineup, feeling I was in the presence of something holy. A difference I've observed in riding mountains as opposed to riding waves is that the mountains hold still for the ride. Surfing happens on a landscape, or I should say a seascape, that's completely in motion. Out in the surf, everything is moving. And this is why surfing becomes such a good metaphor for life. Life doesn't hold still for us. If we don't move with it, life just passes us right by. It doesn't care. Surfing teaches us to go with the flow smoothly and to be in the moment spontaneously. In this way, we get the most out of the wave as well as out of life. Yoga has many immediate lessons for us all, as you yogins and yoginis know from your own practice. Like surfing, yoga can become an ongoing learning process when we choose to see it with open eyes, open heart. The first and most important lesson is learning to live our lives in harmony with nature. The result of a natural life, of course, healthy body and mind. Then we're able, from this, to develop a keen intellect and a strong will. And through these, we're able to build a foundation for a divine and balanced life. Back in 1968, I was at school one day at the University of Hawaii. I noticed this group of girls gathered around a bulletin board. I like to think I just walked right up and boldly asked, "Hey girls, what's going on?" Yeah, more likely I tiptoed up behind them and peeked over the shoulder to see that they were interested in a yoga class announcement. I probably went to that class hoping to see those girls again, but what I found instead was really a life-changing event. It could be said that yoga actually chooses us, that it comes into our life exactly when it's supposed to. And at first we can't understand that yoga is a privilege, but when we realize this, we also begin to see it as a responsibility to our bodies, to our minds, and especially a responsibility to our souls, to our spirit. Surfing was the same. Like I said, those first 20 years was just testing me to see if I was serious. And then the deeper meaning of what those lessons were about started to make some sense to me. Surfing, as in yoga, as I've said, is this never-ending education, but like a lot of school experiences, they're not always welcome. Sometimes we're resistant to them, or worse, they just go right by while our attention is elsewhere. This is so true in surfing, where we have to learn the same thing over and over again till we finally get it, only to forget and have to go through that whole learning process once again. We should always keep learning. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong place. Life is this evolutionary process. We aren't here just to spin our wheels. We're here to move forward, to move upward, to move onward. We need to find some traction. So where do we find this traction? When we forget how to breathe, when we start mouth breathing again, our tires spin and we go nowhere. Yoga, especially a vigorous vinyasa practice or maybe an intense meditation or getting caught inside by a big set in surfing, teach us how important deep, controlled breathing through our nose is in calming an unsteady mind and relaxing an uptight body. Pranayama breathing practice concentrates our prana or nerve energy, and this is the key to open the gateway into our inner self. When we're able to turn all the senses, the 5 main ones, plus all the subtle ones that we use for external observation and feeling, and able to focus them on the inner recesses of our heart, we put ourselves on the pathway to truth. We seek to purify our intellect, bringing our lower nature under control by stilling our restless minds. Swami Sivananda, my first guru, says, "The only basis of true and lasting unity of all humanity is the religion of the heart. The religion of the heart is the religion of love." So love is the key to life, probably just about everything else. Maybe some of you have heard of Duke Hanamoku in Hawaii and pretty much throughout the surfing world. He's revered as the greatest of all surfers, even more than Kelly. I'm sure that Duke would scoff at such a description of himself. I think that he would rather be considered an ambassador of aloha. You see, aloha is this Hawaiian word that's used to describe something that's really universal. The Duke, he always carried cards with him, that he would give out to people whom he thought could benefit from the message on this card. And this is what his card said. It says, "Aloha is love. In Hawaii, we greet friends, loved ones, and strangers with aloha, which means with love." Aloha is the key word to the universal spirit of real hospitality that made Hawaii renowned the world over for fellowship and understanding. Try meeting or leaving your brother nobles with aloha, and you will be surprised by their reaction of aloha of love. I believe it. It is my creed. Aloha to you, Duke. Isn't that beautiful? So I leave you with that wonderful taste of what the aloha spirit is about. Keep paddling for the real waves and for all those metaphorical ones as well. Always surf with aloha and live your lives with aloha. Aloha to you.